like you, most of the important things that I know in life, I taught myself.
Mm.
Right? Look, school is absolutely vital. Writing, reading, arithmetic, all of those things. But even basic economics, like economics for you is never told in school. If you learn economics, it's economics for the government or the big company. It's not economics for you.
Totally.
It's like school is not designed for you. It's designed for them.
I felt that when I was at uni. So when I was studying, and I was also simultaneously getting into some startups and just basic stuff like running a digital agency, service-based businesses. And I didn't find the overlap or relevance at all to what was practical and relevant for me starting a business. But I could tell. And then as I started to get into scaling a business with more staff, then I looked back and I was like, a lot of this stuff the stuff that I was learning in uni when I dropped out would have been helpful now, but this is years into the process of being a business owner.
Well, because the university, and certainly in the business context and even in the technological context, is designed to either help people with research or to help people work in organizations.
Yes.
All schools are factories, and they're not designed for you to build a factory. They're designed for you to manage a factory.
Yes. Yeah. I've been doing,
and even the entrepreneurship courses at universities are mostly what I would call an embarrassment. And I'll tell you why they're an embarrassment, because they're run by lecturers who are researchers who haven't got any dirt under their fingernails. Show me someone with dirt under their fingernails and then you'll get my respect. I actually taught at university for 6 years. I had to leave in disgust. I did it just as part-time when I was running my own ventures and my own businesses. But it was like, you guys are just in a bubble. It's like the cliche is true and maybe worse.
Yeah. Well, I'm really interested to hear your perspective, and I love your free speaking, truth-telling approach to giving your opinion to large organizations and to media outlets. I really love the way that you roll. I'm curious to know how you feel then, having a daughter that's going through the system. Because I can imagine that would be when all this theory gets serious and you actually have some deep and meaningful conversations with yourself about.
So that's really interesting. And a lot of people think I would be like the anti-schooler and the homeschooler, which I am right at the moment because of COVID, but
Sure.
Right, without choice. But I'm actually not that. And I, in the first chapter of my book, The Lesson School Forgot, I say this isn't the anti-school book. This is, there you go. This is the school plus. So in the first instance, I think school is incredible. It gives you the foundation, and unless you have that, you can't. It's very, very hard to build anything on top of that.
Yeah.
And so
from my study on sociology and how humans develop, if they're not exposed to other humans in lots of different ways,
exactly,
slower to develop, and they've got a less well-rounded view.
You learn a lot I think actually the environment of school is as important as the writing, reading, and arithmetic. And so my approach is that I've got a son as well, is that they're in school and they will teach them the formal stuff. It's my job to teach her the informal and to teach her how to think and how to look at things. And so one of the most important things I think from a learning perspective is the way that you pay attention to what's going on around you. It sounds like such a throwaway statement, you've got to pay attention. But so many people don't pay attention. Like, people can drive to work and not see anything. They get there and get to work and say, I don't even remember how I got here. I don't even remember taking left and right and turns. I don't even remember how I got there. So you can do things as a human in autopilot and not really pay attention. If you pay attention to the nuances, you'll see a lot. So I try and teach my kids how to see. Like, I try and point things out that they might just flow right past them. That gives them that anthropological viewpoint. And when it comes to entrepreneurialism and understanding the world and economics and technology, like, every day, every dinner, we're going through these types of things. I'll explain what's happening in the world. I'll explain about business. I'll explaining about finance. Like, I don't mollycoddle them at all when it comes to finance, business, money, the way the world works. I explain all that, like, all the time. So they're like, for me, their school starts when they get home, and we start teaching them about life.
Can you quickly define anthropology for the people that are watching and listening?
Yeah, so anthropology for me is the study of human behavior. It's really the study of human nuance, the things that we do, the habits that we create, and the history of those habits and how they tie together the pattern of human history. And the large part of anthropology and human behavior is it doesn't change much. What does change is the tools we use to get things done. But the reason we do things hasn't changed in hundreds of thousands of years. And I even say that human DNA, I call it the human OS, the human operating system. Right? So it's like we've got the human OS, but we haven't had an upgrade in 200,000 years, unlike your phone, which wants an upgrade every other day, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so what we have is a constant mindset married with a world that's rapidly changing around us with technology. And so there's this mismatch. And so technology is the thing that does change. The reason we do things doesn't change. And so you need to marry those two. Like social media, people just want to be loved and they want someone to tell them everything's going to be okay. Social media is people really just wanting a hug. That's what it is. People just want to say, hey, I'm here. I'm valuable. Do you love me too? Give me a hug. Look, I wrote something that's valuable. I even said that what you did was good and I pressed your button. I love you too. I like you. Can you just look after me? Please let me be loved. That's what social media is. It's the same as what happened in a cave when there was a tiger out the front. It's the same thing. It's just a different form of technology permeating this in a different way.
Yeah, I'm really curious to know how your perspective of understanding human behavior and how it essentially doesn't change, how your awareness over this from your research changed the way that you showed up. Like, I'm sure there were certain moments, even though you've probably been quite aware and perceptive for most of your life, but I'm sure there were some defining moments where you had some of these realizations about how you were showing up within the system or within your job or an old career or something, and then you hit a moment where you're like, hang on a second, and started living differently.
I couldn't say that there was a moment that I realized, but after I'd been in the corporate system, because I worked in corporations for kind of a good 15 years, after I'd done that for a long time, no, I worked in various commercial roles.
Sure.
So I worked in brand marketing and commercial roles for big Fortune 500 companies. And then I worked in advertising for a period as a director of strategy for the world's biggest ad agency. So what I noticed is after going through what I kind of say, it's like a farmer. You've got to go through a couple of cycles. If you've had 10 winters and 10 summers that you've lived through, you will see a pattern.
Yes.
And there's some things in life that no amount of teaching will let someone understand it unless they've been through it. And these are the things that reading is fantastic and I absorb that. But when that's married with observing in the real world and then researching, you put those two together, it's almost like you get this lock and it comes together. It was for me, I started to realize the human behavior side and how important that was. And it's the most important part was after I'd sort of been through a decade or so of seeing the same patterns again and again. And this comes back to the paying attention bit. You won't notice those patterns if you're not paying serious attention. And I also noticed that because I was writing down and journaling the things that I was seeing. So I've been blogging for about, I think it's 15 years, 16 years, since before it was even a thing. I've written more than 3 million words on my blog. And so noticing those things and the problems and trials and tribulations, the things that I noticed that write about, the pattern started emerging, but the same things happen again and again and again. And about, I reckon it was about 10 years ago, I started to get really curious and started to read about history. For the longest time, all I ever read was economics, business, and technology. 3 things, it's all. Like I don't even, you can see my bookshelf there, but I don't even touch I color coded. I don't even touch fiction books. Well, I didn't for a long time. I do now because that helps me explore. But then I started reading history. And I really got deeply into history and history books and what had happened in various wars and Roman Empire and all this sort of stuff. And then I found, hey, it's not just me in the last decade noticing these patterns don't change. This has been going on for thousands of years. And then I read a lot about, brain science and started following some of the Sam Harris and neuroscientists and looking into consciousness and behaviour, and none of this stuff is changing. It's not changing at all. In some ways, it's even more static than I thought it was. The motivations of people are just incredibly static. I mean, the world, the humanity in a species changes so slowly. And that's when I noticed. And then all of a sudden, that's when I developed my template. That's when I developed my template of going, right, technology, the tools, the things that do change, human behavior, what doesn't change, economics, how we tie those together. And that was it. But ever since then, it's almost like you can graduate from economics, because that's sort of static. It understands. And once you understand technology, when something new comes in, you just add that to your repertoire. You almost don't have to go back and read the depths of stuff. I just sort of keep adding the new bits of tech on top of what I already know. But the one thing I keep studying more deeply is humanity and human behavior, because that is a deep, deep, deep wormhole. Deep wormhole.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I've come from a little bit of a different approach with the same belief systems, because I've just been exposed to the PD world, the personal development world. And I found myself in a position with my business where I was chasing economics, kind of reacting to what I was taught to believe is favorable to go after, and charging after power and seem significant, feeling significant in the world and whatnot. And it was actually meditation that gave me the awareness.
Right.
Which is interesting. This is why I want to bring it up. And Sam Harris is massive on meditation as well.
Yeah.
But as I started meditating, I started to see my own patterns of behavior a lot more clearly. It was like a spotlight was being put on the way that I showed up in the world, and I couldn't ignore my own patterns anymore. And it really had me double take why I was doing certain things in business, and it actually threw me out of rhythm. And the objective that was money and growing in business and these kind of things actually started to depreciate, but my awareness started to appreciate. And now I'm kind of getting back to a more ecological way of doing business. But I still find myself torn between the exposure that I have to people that may not have that same awareness that are driving for business, and find myself getting swept up in the excitement of driving business and results and feeling significant. And then I also find myself becoming aware of how that is not sustainable for the world, because it's an open loop in the sense that, economics is it gets us to prioritize resources beyond what we need. And then open loops are created. And in the sense that it's not a sustainable, all resources being used in the production process and whatnot. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
It's a really interesting one. So I'll start with economics and social behavior. One thing that I realized, and I realized this not that long ago, I realized maybe 6 or so years ago that the amount of money you get is determined less by economics and more by positioning, and more by the structures of value people create in their mind. And I'll give you an example, right? And I'll be really personal about it.
Yeah,
so I did a lot of keynote speaking for, I think, more than 10 years before I got paid a cent for it. And the reason I did keynote speaking is I had a startup, which is a very early sharing economy startup. See, that's why I'm a futurist. I had one in 2005, before that was even a thing, right? And I ended up having an exit with that and sold it to a public company, but it was more the software, the back end, more than the consumer side of it. Because the consumer side was too early. I was too early. I had people renting out their cars and their bedrooms on this platform that I developed for people renting things to and from each other. See, I should be a billionaire. So I ended up becoming a futurist.
Timing is so important in business.
It really is. I was too early, and I've been too early with a lot of things. And that's one of the reasons I sort of ended up doing what I do, is because I was just always so interested in what's next. I'd always be a little bit too early, and I get bored easy. So that's a flaw in my behavior. So I just leverage my flaw and turn that into my work, right? So I had this, I used to do speeches to promote the business, because there was a bit of a startup culture, and that's an easy and cheap way to start to get communication and build your business a little bit. So I just started doing speeches all the time. And then people started inviting me. And then one day someone came up to me and said, "Oh, how much do you charge?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? How much do you charge?" I ended up getting paid for a few speeches, $300, 2,000. And then eventually, like sometimes I'll get paid 20 grand to do a speech. It's the same speech. When I say it's the same speech, I'm the same person delivering this. It's the same person delivering the same sentiment. It's different words. It's a different speech, but it's the same speech.
Yes.
The money is different based on the perception of the human behavior and the power structures within it. So economics is largely social. Now, here's what's weird about the problem where we're trying to grow economically. The problem is that the world is a fixed bubble with the same number of resources. Energy conservation is something that anyone who understands science is that it's energy in, energy out. It's the same amount. It just changes places. Right? If you're accumulating more, you're taking away either from the environment or someone else. They're the only two places it can come from. Someone else or the environment. If it's a natural resource, it gets extracted from the environment and probably puts it in worse shape, or you're extracting a resource from someone else. It's kind of not cool. It kind of isn't helping anyone except your ego.
Yes.
The thing that is, and I've got a real problem with it. I struggle with it. It's a struggle because you've got the family and you've got 200,000 years of evolution in your brain that says gather all of the resources you can gather because you never know when a really cold winter comes and you need those chestnuts in your cave. You need the bison in your cave. And if you don't have it, you're going to starve to death.
Yeah.
And the reason that humans are so short term is for 99.9% of our existence, we didn't know whether we'd make it through the winter.
Yes.
That's why we can't solve climate change. You're never going to solve climate change when most people, 50%, which we found out during COVID, live week to week.
Yeah, I read your blog on that. And it was crazy.
How can you ever expect anyone to make a decision that's not even for them, it's for the wider world, when they don't even know if they're going to make it next week? Right?
It's crazy,
though. You can't. You've got a mismatch.
Yeah.
You can't. It's not going to, it's never, that's why government policy matters. You can't ask someone, "Oh, make sure you put the recycling in the recycling bin." Like, fucking seriously? Get your brain turned on. It has to be government policy. That's like asking someone to build their own seatbelt and put it in a car in 1950. That's what that's like. It's not going to fix anything. The seatbelts have got to come in the car.
Yes.
And so this quandary between the world growing and business growing, it's a real problem. It's not going to go away. There is a theory behind it. It was very popular about 15 years ago called steady state economics. Steady state economics is we don't use any more resources. We use the resources we've got, and we actually don't want GDP growth. And GDP is actually a really, really bad measure because it forces the consumption of more resources.
Yes.
And the reason that GDP, gross domestic product, which is all of the money spent in an economy for the listeners, is that when that was instituted 100 or so years ago, that was a reasonable measure of how well society was doing because most people were poor. And if we spent more, that meant that we got electricity in our house and we had access to healthcare and we had transport and we had education and we had more than one jumper and one pair of pants. It was a pretty good measure of society getting better. It's no longer a good measure because everyone's got more than they need. Well, I shouldn't say everyone because people do struggle around the world. But for want of the description of people watching this on the internet, it's not a good measure anymore. And it just encourages excess consumption of resources. The only hope that I have for the future is that the more things digitize, then we can pay people more money and they can use less resources. We have this process called the dematerialization. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a process so the process of dematerialization is things that used to be physical get turned into software. And because they get turned into software, they use less resources.
Sure.
So a classic example, your phone has more than 1,000 things that used to be physical in it. So a flashlight, your phone's got that. Well, you used to have a flashlight that was made of plastic, or a map for the road. That was paper. You had a map in there, or a ruler, or a spirit level, or a newspaper, or a CD player. So that's all in your phone. These
Yes.
things have been dematerialized, which reduce the consumption of resources. They've been turned in
Yes.
from physical things into software things. And this is where the world gets kind of like metaphysical, right? This
Yes.
is interesting kind of futurist stuff that it's hard to get your head around. That process gives us hope that we can actually have more, but consume less.
Mm. So,
And so
yeah.
if we move things to digital, the money can continue to flow, but we can use less plastic, less whatever. And as the world finds ways to generate energy and electricity through renewable resources, that's also a dematerialization process which feeds into that loop.
Yeah, super interesting. Really love your perspectives on this stuff. So, what I find tricky is that the people who are most powerful in their primitive nature and desire for power,
Yeah.
that have the arguably consume the most because they
They do.
buy a bunch of shit, are probably the most relentless and protective and have the most at stake in their own mind, and something to lose with their self-worth. And what you were talking about with social media and like, please like me, please love me. They've got their own kind of like,
They have that they
yeah,
are psychopaths in the way that they don't understand that they have more than they need
yeah,
and want to maintain the power, which is actually, greed is actually the same thing as fear.
yeah, absolutely.
They're the same thing. A lot of people, they think that they're not. Greed is the execution of fear. Greed
Yes,
is fear in action.
yes, because there's no trust.
Right, yeah, and it's like,
Um,
I won't have enough, so I'm going to accumulate more because I'm scared. Greed and fear are the same thing.
yes, yes. So what is your perspective on how that's going to change, or is that going to change and evolve? Because I see hope for humanity. I personally have felt a bit of a shift, and it's not necessarily on the reptilian brain perspective of things. Like, I know that I still have the desire for safety and the desire for power and to reproduce and these kind of things, but I do feel a bit of a shift in my uh, empathy and compassion. I can feel it with you as well. Like, I can still sense that that's a part of you and it's something that's developed, but I see some people don't develop that. And we're talking about how our DNA hasn't changed for millions of years, but I still personally feel a shift. Is that just ignorance, or do you
Yeah,
actually
it's not
sense,
ignorance.
because it's a different plane of
Yeah,
thinking, right?
there's definitely a shift. Look, information shapes us, and even though when I say we haven't changed in 200,000 years, we have. It's a very slow moving thing.
Yes, but it also depends on what lens you're looking at it, right? I'm talking at a
That's,
spiritual
yeah,
lens here.
right. So, look, what happens, I think, is that we perceive the things that are most proximal to our world.
Yes.
Right. So one of the things that I perceive at the moment is that there's a pushback against big tech, because I think big tech is the opposite of what they sell themselves to be. They sell themselves to be a service and a resource, and everyone benefits, and we're actually growing the economy, and you can tap into our resources and grow your business through using our tools. But it's actually really just, they're the schoolyard bullies now. They've gone from being tomorrow's heroes who are going to take down all the big evil corporations like Exxon and Ford and Mobil. And then they just became Exxon, Ford, and Mobil with beautiful primary coloured logos and entrepreneurs with hoodies, right? They became the thing that they hated.
Yes.
I believe that there's a push against big tech, but I think it's because I'm in a wormhole of people who believe that same thing, and I'm just in that world of communicating and listening to those podcasts and reading those books. And no, now what we've got more than ever, now that there's no mainstream media, is that there is no sensible way that brings society forward together. Because with algorithms, we all live in our separate wormholes of existing belief systems.
Yes.
I actually, sadly, don't think it's getting better. What I think is that you and me and all of us are in our wormholes of what we see. We go, it is shifting. It is shifting, but it's shifting with slithers and in portions. And this is why one of the big sadnesses with mainstream media. Mainstream media, for all its bad, one thing it did well is it represented a sensible center of what was happening, where they had to represent the left and the right and the middle. And it gave us a way to move forward. I
Mm.
feel like that's really at risk. Now, it might be that humanity finds a way around that because humanity is an ecosystem, a rich ecosystem where information infiltrates.
Yeah.
And I hope that more information gets out there. But I think that the biggest challenge right now on that shift, that's that shift in sentiment, that positive nature. Look, and I'm a positive person, but I'm a realist too. So I think that we can get there. And that's why I push for the things that I push for, is because I want to be someone who actually helps that shift. I want to bust down that door that's not letting it out and letting it progress. I think the biggest problem right now is algorithms. And I'll tell you why. Because algorithms keep people in their wormholes.
Yes.
And I think that they're almost like a fence that we put around people's belief systems. So if I type in Donald Trump news, I'm going to get all the negative stuff about him.
Yes.
But if a Trump supporter types in Donald Trump news, they're going to get all the positive stuff.
Yeah.
It's the same search with a different result driven by an algorithm.
Yes.
And that's the problem. So that's why I think algorithms need to be regulated, and we need to be able to, A, turn them off, press a button and go, just give me the organic feed, not an algorithm-based feed. That's the first thing. And they need to be like an ingredients list on the back of a pack of cereal. What's inside it?
Yes.
Because unless you know what you're eating, you will never really change your eating habits.
Yes.
And for the longest time in the 50s and the 60s, when manufactured food became in the early 1920s, mate, we had lithium in 7-Up, we had cocaine in Coca-Cola, and we had heroin in tooth drops to solve a sore tooth. And that was all at the point where you didn't have to put in the ingredients what you were selling. You know, the old term snake oil comes from that, because companies like Johnson & Johnson and Kellogg's and all these guys had ingredients that were just insane until we regulated it. And then we started to, and then you had the whole health movement. That's actually not good for you. Oh, that's actually, right? So unless you regulate, people don't know. And if people don't know, they won't change their behavior.
Yes. And it's like the health movement naturally came in to balance that out. But because what I see is that economics, technology is expanding so rapidly that we kind of do have common sense of a way to make things sustainable, because we always had, just in a really easy to manage way, where we got to see the patterns over lots of thousands of years handed down from hunters and gatherers to hunters and gatherers to hunters and gatherers. And now we do this infinitely expanding technology, and economics takes a while for us to catch up. And in that lag, a lot of damage can be done.
Yeah, and what you don't have is generational wisdom doesn't get passed down, because no trend lasts a generation. That's a real problem.
That's crazy.
Right? Wisdom is the thing that no one values until they have it.
Yes.
And it has to be earned with scars. You haven't got it unless you're scarred. Show me someone with scars, and that's someone I want to sit down and have a coffee with.
Yes.
Right? But the problem now is when things change so fast, there isn't a chance for wisdom, because that trend doesn't even last. It won't even last a generation before another one sits on top of it, top. And you've got a weak foundation and you don't have any wisdom holding it together.
And yet you still have these polarity points to the toxic nature of some of these expanding trends. You still somehow have a balanced perspective coming in, or maybe that's the circles or the algorithms that I'm seeing or whatever, but I definitely feel that there is balance. Yeah,
there is, but it's almost like there is, I think there's balancing countervailing forces. For every extreme view, I think there's a balanced view, and I think that does exist. But they used to live on the same scale in a wider society where everyone was connected through mainstream media, and, you know, we sort of were more collaborative. And now it feels like those things, those countervailing, balancing things, are living in almost like separate economies and separate worlds. I mean, we're connected through the fabric of technology, but it's almost like that force is just, it's hyper excluded. Where they used to sort of be with each other.
Yeah, because marketing is obviously more potent the more specific a message is. So with these algorithms becoming more and more polarizing, then you can sell something to someone easier if they've got a more specific viewpoint.
That's right. And you can find them directly, and no one else is exposed to that message. And there's no one to say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on over here? Because the people that you don't see it. But if we're all sitting, one of the things that's interesting about television anthropologically is that we used to all sit down, and I don't know how old your listeners are, but we used to sit down in front of the TV and we had to choose something to watch together.
Yeah.
So and so there was this air of compromise and exposure to non-preferences, right? And the exposure to things that you would, it's almost like reading the things you disagree with is actually good for you.
Yes.
Because then all of a sudden you can make your own decision. People say, which book should I read on finance? Should I read book A or read book B? And I say, read them both and make up your own mind.
Yes.
But what we've got now is people are only reading one book.
Yes.
Metaphorically.
So true, because I live with housemates, and if we don't like, occasionally, I'd say 70, we're a pretty cohesive household, but 70% of the time we'll choose on something together, but sometimes we go, fuck it, I'm just going to go watch my thing, you watch your thing.
And that's what happens now. So everyone will sit around the couch on their different individual screens being fed a different diet of what is happening in the world. Because media is a reflector. It's not a director. It's a reflector. And so everyone is seeing different reflections of the world. And so then you get this, and you can see this on the street. Years ago, you would see people on the street looking, interacting, eyeing each other. Now they're just looking into their device. There's something very interesting with that. Yeah. And it might be short term. It might just be like a 20-year sort of thing that after a while people go, it's boring. There's nothing in there. Like you would have scrolled on your screen and gone, God, I've just wasted 10 minutes. Who gives a shit? Like there's nothing interesting in there. I actually made a point this in this COVID period. I've specifically not looked at my phone. Whenever I've gone to scroll, I've picked up a book on purpose. And you know what I find? A book is protein and a screen is sugar.
Yes. Yeah, totally. And you feel crap. You can feel it in your body.
Like, you feel it, you sense it. Yeah. Like I think our bodies are a big part of our brain and we just haven't realized it yet. Like I think that consciousness comes from the physicality, and now we're getting into very Sam Harris territory. But I feel like the reason that a lot of technologists like Ray Kurzweil, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's this guy. So Ray Kurzweil, you find him really interesting. So he's the head of technology at Google, and he's what they call a singularitarian. And that's a person who believes in the singularity, that basically the premise is that eventually computational power will get so powerful that everything will just change and it'll rapidly build on itself where it's an unstoppable force. And
like
he believes
artificial
that,
intelligence.
Yeah. Yep. But he also believes that the human mind is the same as computational thinking. He thinks that they're the same thing. And he believes that brute force, if you have enough intelligence in a machine or in a computer, it'll eventually surpass humans. Now, that consciousness will evolve from computation, which I don't believe. Because I believe that wetware and dryware are two different things. And for listeners, wetware is biological beings.
Yes.
And dryware is like software with electricity, dry code and wet code. I don't believe that they're the same thing. And I believe, and this is just me, this is no science here, right? This is just thinking,
go for it.
Just thinking out loud, right? Yeah. I just believe that there's a lot of intelligence in our skin and in our body. And I believe that the brain might be the warehouse, but I don't think it's the arbiter of everything. And I actually think that our skin and our body and our neurons in a way think. And I think that your body knows things. And by seeing behaviors and feeling it, that's part of what's happening.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy how you can see microcosms just look exactly the same as their more macro relatives. Like you see the nervous system looks like the solar system.
And it looks like the internet. The internet looks like a human nervous system where you have aggregating power forces of the brain and the heart and so on. And even, the blood, if you look at a city, right? The city is like the heart, and the arteries, they're called arteries, arterials going out with the cars. They're like the blood cells coming in to get reoxygenated and come back out to the nervous system. There's actually a word for it. That's called fractals.
Yes.
And fractals are basically smaller and larger representations of the same patterns in systems. And a lot of people believe that there's an inextricable link between nature and the wider universe with the things that we build, because we use the same tools to build things, therefore they have to represent each other visually.
It's
God,
so
we're getting heavy here.
This is what I love. I love these discussions. I love your perspective. It's awesome. So we've gone pretty deep with all this stuff. I'd love to bring it back to the question, so what? What does all this mean? How do we show up with this? And you live in a certain way. I feel like we've spoke about how becoming more and more disconnected from a more, I like to use the word symbiotic because I was taught it, meaning mutually beneficial, within like a tribal culture where things are always for the collective good of that tribe. And then you expand that to TV. TV was creating more of a balanced perspective on things versus that highly isolated perspective. And so it seems to be, but I wouldn't say TV was as coercive as like a tribe. So it's becoming more like it's becoming more isolating. What is your way of staying connected? How do you do it personally? Because you're a very interesting guy. You said before I was doing keynotes and speeches, and because that was a way to market my business, but I can tell you love talking. You know, that's what you do for a living. So do I. I love discussing these things and researching, and my curiosity just is overbearing, and I just keep going deeper into things. So you've set your life up in a way where your equivalent of the value that you provide in its kind of narrowed way is, meaning it's you've got a specific skill set.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Around knowledge, and then you live that as opposed to doing something you don't like for the sake of it. What got you to that point, and what advice would you give people that are listening to be able to live their passion and live their uniqueness in the world?
You know, what's really interesting is that I think that passion on its own is not enough. And I think that just telling someone to follow their passion is bad advice. And I'll tell you what, I think that what you've got to do is follow your effort, because if you follow your effort instead of your passion, what you're marrying up is something that you naturally are good at and you probably like a little bit too. Because I think that just being good at it isn't enough. And I think that just being passionate about it isn't enough either. Like I'm passionate about surfing and different things, but if I tried to make a living out of that, I'd be going hungry, I can tell you, right? So there's a lot of things that I like that I'm not good at. You've got to find a balance between something that you like and something that you have a natural proclivity, you have a natural goodness, you have a natural talent and advantage. And I'm a person who absolutely believes in talent. Anyone who tells you talent doesn't matter is fucking bullshitting and hasn't bothered to pay attention to the world around them. Now, that doesn't mean that a talented person will do well. There's nothing more common than wasted talent. Right. But you show me two people, someone who's got natural talent for something and someone who hasn't. Now, if the talented person doesn't work at it, the person without the talent might get better. But if someone's got talent and someone hasn't got talent or hasn't got as much talent, they both work the same amount. It's going to be day and night. Talent is real.
Yeah.
Right. And pretending people don't have talent is just foolish.
And this is self-awareness. This is what you're talking about, paying attention.
And this comes back to the whole school thing of everyone gets a fucking trophy. Well, guess what? In the real world, they don't. Teaching kids, what did you go? Oh, here's my ribbon. I got 37th place. That's not going to fucking teach you anything about the real world when you get into it.
I do think the problem is like I don't commend that, but I don't feel like they place weight on a myriad of different skills.
But agree.
At the same level. So if they had a trophy for 20 different areas.
Well, here's the problem is there's 5 things that you can get a trophy in, right? But the world is filled with millions of things. And I think, here's what I do think. I think that everyone has a talent for something. I really do believe that. And most people don't find it because they don't explore enough. They don't try enough things. Yes. I wish I tried more things and quit things quicker.
Yes.
Stay a season. Don't leave the soil when it gets dry and the summer comes along. Stay a season. Go through a winter, a summer, and a spring. Stay a season. But don't stay if you're in infertile ground.
Yes.
2 or 3 seasons. Move on.
Yes. But this is this idea that you talk about, that we're so short-term thinking, that when we're in that idea, it's like there's more perceived pain to leaving something and trying more than there is to staying there and
exactly.
and growing it.
It's the whole accumulation of resources in your cave, your mortgage, all of that. But look, I think that you've got to find something that look back and see the things that you keep doing more and more of
Yeah.
and then have the courage to pursue the thing that you just naturally would just kept doing. The way I ended up doing what I was doing was kind of almost by stealth. I didn't design it. It just happened.
Stealth.
But yeah, it was. I just like looked back and went, holy wow, all I'm doing is thinking and writing about this stuff. And people kept inviting me to it. And then one day, it was 2013, and I said, you know what? I quit my job and I said to my wife, I said, I'm going to see if I can think, write, and speak for a living. She said, what do you mean think, write, and speak? You can't do that. I said, that's what I'm going to do. She said, what about? I said, well, I'll just, it's always about technology and economics. I'm just going to think, write, and speak. Just that. Nothing else. And that's all I do. I don't do anything but that.
Yes.
And people pay me for what I think first.
Yeah.
Right. And then I either get paid for writing or speaking, but I always prefer speaking because it's quicker and I get more money than writing.
Yeah.
So I think first, then I write it down to make sure what I thought was valid and test that in the market, and then people pay me to speak.
Yes.
Where I share my ideas. That's it.
Yeah.
And I did that because I realized I'd written so much on my blog and so many people had invited me to speak. And then I went, I'm going to formalize my informal behavior.
Yes.
That's how I did it.
So how long did it take you from, because I'm at the start of that process, like I started a business and it exploded when I was using my talent to grow it. And then I got to a point where I was like, now I need to be a CEO and be across things. And I started disconnecting from my natural talent and trying to sharpen my sword in every
this
area.
Is really interesting.
Now I'm setting things up to be aligned with what I do naturally, which is why I'm doing this podcast with you now. But I'd love for the listeners to understand that it doesn't just mean that you're going to profit overnight from something like, well, maybe you did. How long did it take for you from when you had that
realization? Pretty quick. I reckon, so that realization, and again, I'm being really candid here and sharing personal information.
Fantastic.
So look, the first year I did it, I earned half of what I earned in my corporate income, which was pretty high senior director level income. I earned about half. By the way, I was in a position where I'd sold businesses and startups, where I owned all my assets and my house and everything. So I was in an enviable position where I could take risks, because I had the base.
Yep.
I left corporate. The first year I earned half. The second year I matched my corporate, and then every year since then I've doubled it.
Wow, that's incredible.
Like just, and large parts of it just were really about confidence.
Yes.
The most important asset you can have in your career, because once you get to a certain skill level, it's really just confidence and brand positioning. It really is.
Because it makes other people, it's value. If you're confident in the concept and you tell a CEO, this is what it is, then the CEO makes decisions with confidence. If you said the same information with less confidence,
they don't believe it.
Has less value.
People believe what you believe. You've got to believe it first, and then they will follow you. They believe what you believe, right? But if you don't believe it, they can smell it. They smell it, right? And so what I started to believe more and more in myself. And because I do the homework, right? I do the homework. I read the books. I think, I study, I do it. I know that I know more because I know they're not doing that. And that gives me a positive spiral of confidence. So the income just kept going up and up. And it just, that naturally happened. But, but no, it just.
And I'm awesome.
No, like.
I'm just staring you.
No, but I'm just being really candid about it. It
so
took a while, but then that's where it went.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing example of what happens when you back yourself, you have the certainty, you follow your talent, and you keep at it consistently long term. And congratulations, and thanks for being a great role model for that. That's really awesome. So what do you do on a daily basis to keep yourself centered, grounded? Like, what are the practices that you do that you believe have the biggest impact on your mindset, your certainty, and living a life that is one of fulfilling?
All right. So I'm going to tell you what I don't do. What I don't do is I don't act like an automaton, and I don't do all the stuff that you might read on Business Insider about, what 10 things billionaires do before breakfast. Here's what I reckon. They're really bad billionaires. If I was a billionaire, I'd be in bed before breakfast, mate, and I'd just stay in bed until lunchtime. It's like, what good is being a billionaire if you get up at 4 a.m.? That's terrible, billionaires. What's the point, right? Isn't that what poor people do? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I follow how I feel, right? What I don't try and do is fight. If I feel tired, I sleep. If I
Mm.
feel energetic, I do stuff. Like I'm not a slave to the clock.
Mm.
I'm a slave to how I feel inside. If I feel like I want to have a nap in the afternoon, I have a nap.
Mm.
Right. And so, but this is an important part of the type of work that I do, because the type of work that I do is I'm a burst player.
Mm.
Right. I'm not this
ya.
type of work
Yeah.
that is about consistency. My work suits an inconsistent player. My job is it's about boom and bust.
Mm.
So I can be busting when I'm by myself, but when I'm in front of a client, it's boom time. I've got to make sure I'm on. It's like a football or a sports player.
Yeah.
I have my training, I have my rest, and then I have my race.
Yes.
And so my world is like that. And so my life is probably more like an athlete.
Mm.
And so I have a lot of, like, I go surfing a lot. I exercise most days and keep fit. I spend a lot of time reading. I spend a lot of time lazing around on the couch, but I feel like I'm always thinking. And because I have those downtimes, I reckon my brain works better.
Oh, 100%.
And often, like when I'm exercising or just lying on the couch, I go, and I'll get my notepad out and go, I'll just write it down. Yeah. And I just write down those little, and I never ever let a thought get away. I always document everything I have. No, you can't let them get away. You've got to catch them and write them down. If they get away, that could be the seed of greatness.
Yes.
So that's how I run my thing. I do a lot of homework, a lot of research. I pay attention everywhere I go. Yeah. Like I cannot walk into a restaurant or a business without analysing their strategy and their business and what they're doing and guessing how many staff they've got, what they earn, what their cash flow is. I watch 10 customers come in, they spend probably an average of $110. How much money is that? The rent would be this. Like I'm always doing that. Yeah. So a lot of it's just happening. Yeah. And then my thoughts, the things that I write down, are the permutation of that so that I can share in tight sound bites with people what it is.
Yes.
And that tightness of execution on the football field or the sports field is where I win and lose.
Yes.
And
that's all people see. Yeah.
That's all they see. So it doesn't matter.
Like an athlete as well.
Right. And even one of the things I was saying with the economics of how it went for me and I got to where I was is that, I realized that it's a little bit like a handbag, selling a handbag. You can sell one down at Victoria Market that costs $100, or there can be an Hermes handbag, which is $200,000. It's the same leather. The craftsman making each of them is no different.
Yes.
What is different is what's built around it, the positioning, the brand, the confidence, and where it's distributed. So, and this is important for listeners, economically, you've got to understand if you're in a commodity business. If you're in a commodity business, the only way you can scale is to scale outside of you. Right? You need other people's time and other people's money. Otherwise, you can never scale. With me, the only way I can scale is to get better customers because I've only ever got 24 hours a day.
Yes.
I can never, ever scale.
Yes.
The only thing I can do is get paid more for the same work.
Yes. And I feel like that's where self-worth comes in because you choose, the more confident someone is, everyone's got a choice of who they target. Now, there's so many young web designers and agencies out there and online marketers, and you could literally choose anyone to target. Why would you choose someone that is a low-paying client? I did. It's a self-worth thing.
It's confidence, but also what's interesting is, and a lot of people don't realize that, is that they think that that's what the work is worth because they think that the market determines the price, and that's not true. You determine the price, not the market. Yeah. And I'll give you an example, right? Someone who designs a logo, I can go onto 99 Designs and get a logo designed for $100 or whatever. Now that logo will be as good as a logo from Australia's top design firm that a big bank might pay $10 million for. The logo is no better. They're not buying the logo. They're buying the person who does it.
Yes.
And also, the people who've got the money to spend do not believe that $100 one could be as good as $1 million one or a $10 million one. And that's the difference when you're in information-based work or creative work, or it depends on the work you're in, but in that realm, personal services work, the price is based on the perception of the buyer and the perception of the seller. Now, in the lower end of the market, the perception of the buyer and the seller is both low. They both perceive it to be worth less. The same, and design is a classic example, web design. Do you think NAB, or Commonwealth Bank is going to go to some web people who design some stuff for an ad agency that's going to charge them $100? The ad might be just as good, or the design might be just as good, but they're not going to pay that amount. So you've got to get better clients.
Yes.
And that's mindset. That's all mindset, all of it.
Yes.
And presentation. You've got to make sure the way you put yourself forward looks well designed, like the handbag.
Yes.
It's got to be well designed, and there's an art to that.
Yes.
That's where the difference lies.
Yeah. There's obviously the outliers that just carry themselves terribly and don't have the attitude to be able to make sure they're delivering on time, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I really wanted to speak to something that you mentioned earlier about being a burst player. Because I feel that's with me the same. And I feel no one is the opposite of that. I don't feel like anyone's designed to be working all day, every day, 5 days a week. Yeah. Even though I would agree that some would be more comfortable doing
some are better at
burst. Not burst, but some people would rather stay active for longer versus short and sharp and crazy. But I don't think anyone's a burst player.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's a machine that goes all day, every day. Because I was like that in my business, but I'd normalized it. Even with the guys that we had our chat with, the EO crew of these really successful business owners, it's normalized. And I find myself wanting to hit, like if we're away, I go to bed earlier, I get up later. I get tired quicker, but I'm not filling myself with coffee. I'm not drinking. There's subtle differences, but I feel like we've normalized this high output. You haven't smashed any coffee. We've normalized this high output, and there's the expectation to perform at that level. But this is where this awareness comes in that you spoke about, actually paying attention, because it's something like we wave to each other and everyone's like, well, everyone waves. Well, what is waving? It's
that's paying attention. What is that? It's crazy.
Yeah.
What is that?
I know, it's just random, but everyone does it. So it's just normal, and it's normalized. And same thing, everyone works, or most people work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, if not a lot more than that. Whereas you were able to pay attention. You've created this amazing lifestyle for yourself where you do what you love, you get paid well for your talent, plus you have space to rejuvenate, have a more ecological lifestyle, spend more time with your family, be healthier. It's just worlds apart, but this is normal for you. And
it wasn't always that way, but I've made a decision to do it.
It's phenomenal. It's really
So look, I don't think anyone is. I think humans are burst players by nature, right? And this goes back to industrialization.
Yes.
Before the Industrial Revolution, the average human worked about 4 hours a day. Right, 4 hours a day, either tending to their field where they grew their vegetables and their animals and so on, or even in hunter and gathering times, we'd go and hunt and then we'd come back. And the 9 to 5 thing was a function of piece labor, and piece labor was when you got paid by how many pieces you made in the factory. And so there was an incentive to stay longer because you got paid. Actually, before the Industrial Revolution, very few people actually had jobs. What they did was they sold products, goods, and services. They actually didn't get paid by the hour. They did the work and sold a table that they made. Or sold the animals that they
just trading goods.
They just traded goods and services, but there was no hourly rate because there was no factories. The other people who worked for people were people who worked in armies or for kings. That was it. Right. And so that then developed this mindset that we work 9 to 5 in this giant block. The reason humans chose to work in that giant block was it made sense, because the longer you work, the more you got. But then what happened was when the office got attached to the factory, and when we industrialized administration, that just followed the same pattern. It didn't make any sense, but it just followed the same pattern. And then now that pattern is there. And then now it even got worse, where you don't work 9 to 5 anymore. You work beforehand, checking your emails in bed, and then you get home and then you're doing emails at night. And now it's 24 hours a day. But I think we're starting to realize that, and even the COVID situation stopped it, where people are going, mate, I'll do a bit now and then a little. I think we're actually going to get back to that natural flow state of I'm doing something now. And this comes back to we get paid not for the time we work, but the value we create. Now, if I'm making pinheads in a factory, of course, time and value are almost inextricably linked. But in most work, they're not, unless you're physically making something,
Which
What you
used to
get
be
paid,
everything, right?
which used to be everything, but now it's
Yeah.
less and less and less. Like manufacturing is like a tiny portion of our economy now. It was about 60% in the mid 60s. I think it might even be about 15% now.
Yes.
So now what we get paid for is the value we create, not the time we work.
Mm.
And so what we need to do is divorce ourselves from time.
Mm.
Right? Like when I employ people to do bits and pieces for me, I just say, I want this done. How much is it? I don't care if it takes you a minute or fucking 10 hours. I don't care.
Yes.
I just want the thing. And if it takes you a minute, congratulations. Fantastic.
Yes.
I'm happy. I don't care. I wanted the thing that works for me. Good.
Mm.
I want the other person to make money. So I think that people, humans are mostly burst players. They're not that static. I don't think that suits humanity.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that more of us can divorce ourselves from that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. My understanding is that came from Martin Luther in like the 1600s or something like that, who is that religious revolutionary who said that made this link of determinism, created determinism, which is like your life is determined by God before it starts. So if you become wealthy, that means God pre-selected you to be a more holy and righteous person. So people worked really hard because they thought, well, if I end up rich, that means I
deserved
more chance of going to heaven and being in good stead with God. And I think, well, from what I've read, that's like really propelled this whole.
Yeah, it's like the work will set you free almost, right? The work will set you free.
From like God will set you free. And if you have money, that means that God chose you.
Yeah.
Which is great, because that's what I've read is what spurred on. That happened right before the Industrial Revolution, and that's what allowed that to happen. But we just normalized that work.
Yeah, we
money
did.
is
And then
normal because it's a habit now.
Yeah, it becomes a habit. Look, there's a lot of superstition with work.
Yeah.
A lot of superstition. And we need to bust down those superstitions.
Yeah.
There isn't, to a point, it's like wealth. You know, you've read the studies that say after a certain amount of wealth, I think the number used to be 70 or 80,000, maybe it's a bit more. Once you get to that general level, your amount of happiness doesn't change. You've read all those studies, right?
I've experienced it myself.
Yeah, me too.
Being
right?
wealthy, and then
same.
becoming
I've had periods of really big income and low income. Mine's been really quite undulating, going back in time, because I was entrepreneurial and doing ventures, and you have times of like feast and famine, and I found looking back, I was never any happier when I had more money or less money. Actually, now I'm probably happy, and it's, you know why? It's time. I reckon that time and happiness are inextricably linked to each other. So long as you've got access to the resources you need for, you know, food and housing and all the basics and some entertainment and what have you.
I think you've also normalized a lifestyle that is pretty fulfilling.
Yeah, look, I get offered all the time. I get offered all the time to join corporations at a very senior level, you know, heading up IT or, you know, heading up their technology, being their CTO, that type of stuff. And I say to them, you can't afford me. And they say, name your price. And I say, my price is I get to do what I want 3 days a week. I said, and then I say, told you.
Yeah, and you will end up having someone say yes, and then you'll be like, oh crap.
Gonna be actually, well, but yeah, they think that the price is money.
Yes. Awesome. Well, I reckon that says burst. We've been on a solid burst here, so I'd love to wrap up the interview, and thank you so much for your time. And I really want to honor you, Steve, for being such an open-minded, free thinker who's able to be really aware and thinking so independently to then create such an amazing life for yourself and be a role model for others to do the same. I really feel like you're such a phenomenal inspiration. So thank you so much for jumping on today.
It's a pleasure.
For those that have come on and want to check you out more, what's the best way to connect with you and get the potency of Steve from this moving forward?
So the best way to connect is at my website. Okay, cool. SteveSammartino.com, and I imagine you'll have a link in the show notes or something. Yep, so there you go. Yep, SteveSammartino.com. On my website, you can find everything: my books, my social media feeds.
Yeah.
But it's important to sign up to my email. I do a blog entry once a week at various times, and it's a bit of a tome. It's usually 1,000 words. It's deep thought. It's for thinkers. If you're not a thinker, don't subscribe. You won't like it. But if you
Yes.
deeply think about the world, economics, politics, and technology, you're going to go, wow, it's heavy protein. You got to chew it hard, right? It's heavy protein, but it's for thinkers. And I make no apologies about that. If you want a sugar hit, go to BuzzFeed. But if you want protein, come to me. And the reason I tell people to go to my website, stevesammartino.com, I'll tell you why, is because my business philosophy is never, ever grow your vegetables in someone else's garden. And everyone sends everyone else to their social media feeds. And what you're doing is you're sending your people to someone else's business. And that's a bad strategy.
Yes. And what I want to give from an external perspective from reading your blogs over the last month or so since I came across your genius, is that they're very, you have to be curious and open-minded, but they're very potent. It's not like, they're very easy to read from my experience. Like not easy to read in terms of you should know what he's talking about off the bat, but it's all killer, no filler. And so even if the longer blog posts are still filled with really amazing knowledge that gets you thinking, they're dense. They're
dense with ideas, but easy ideas to digest. If you look at it, it's like, oh, I get it. Because I try to teach by analogy. Everything I do is I'll talk about a technology concept and then, relate it to pizza or something. Like it's,
like your TED Talk. And I'd highly recommend checking out Steve's TED Talk, which is uses the metaphor of pizza, growing a pizza, which is really cool. Yeah. So thanks so much for coming
Mate,
on.
I loved it.
Big
Thank
love.
you.
Yeah. Awesome.